Okay, and last but not least, we're going to talk to Bailey Kennet, and she is with Arizona Land and Water Trust, and I've got a little bio on her. She is the Desert Rivers Program Manager at Arizona Land and Water Trust, and I probably mentioned I used to work there some years back, but before Bailey was there. She graduated Eckerd College in Florida with degrees in environmental studies and economics. She worked the federal level to promote water emergency response, focusing on drought resilience. All right, she's already getting her PowerPoint up. She went to grad school at U of A, and she was a graduate research assistant for the Western Resources Research Center. She joined Arizona Land and Water Trust in 2018, and they're working with agricultural landowners to restore flows to southern Arizona rivers. So Bailey, I will let you take it away. Thank you so much.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. All right, sounds good. Well, thank you, Sharma. Thank you for the invitation to speak. Really appreciate being here. So really appreciate Sarah's presentation. It's nice to hear another overview of the adjudication. I get one of those every so often, and I feel like I learn something new every time I have an overview. So it's great. So today I'm going to talk about our Desert Rivers program at the Arizona Land and Water Trust. So we are a nonprofit based in Tucson. Go ahead and scroll through some slides here. Okay. So those of you that are familiar with us probably are aware of our land protection work. We were founded as a land trust over 40 years ago. And we work with interested agricultural landowners that come to us that would like to protect their ranch as a ranch forever. So just protect that in perpetuity. So we do that with funding partners like NRCS and Arizona Game and Fish Department to put a conservation easement on those private ranch lands. So I'm not going to talk too much more today about our land protection work or conservation easements. We've got a strong staff that works on that, so I'd be happy to put you in touch if you have any more questions. So to transition into our Desert Rivers work, it was about 12 years ago or so that we were getting increased inquiries from some of our landowner partners that were really interested to learn more about their water rights and what they could and couldn't do with their water rights and what sort of conservation options they had around their water rights. So we took that opportunity to develop a handbook, so to do some research, to develop a handbook, and to have some workshops across southern Arizona. So we had a number of these initial workshops in the Upper Gila watershed, and a lot of the questions and feedback and topics we were getting around water conservation options really helped inform this handbook that we put together. And around the same time, around the mid-2000s or so, the concept of water transactions, voluntary water transactions, was gaining a lot of traction in the Pacific Northwest. Now I'm going to talk in detail about environmental water transactions, but essentially it's a voluntary short-term or long-term transfer of water from an agricultural, municipal, industrial use to an in-stream flow use. Like I said, this was gaining a lot of popularity in Oregon and Washington, and we were really interested in this idea and interested to see if some form of this conservation tool could be applied and used here in Arizona. And the trust works with land transactions. A conservation easement is essentially a real estate transaction for ranch land. So we thought, okay, well, we've got this experience, this transaction-based, market-based experience. Can we translate that to water transactions? So we decided to dig into this concept a little bit more. Now there's two main differences between Pacific Northwest watersheds and those here in southern Arizona. The first is obvious, and that's that their rivers look a lot different than ours here. The second is that those states had a regulatory framework, a state regulatory framework that allowed for that transfer of water rights. Now in Arizona, our regulatory framework doesn't easily allow for that transfer, but we decided to pursue environmental water transactions anyway. So let's see here. So our Desert Rivers program focuses in 3 watersheds. Our first environmental water transaction was in the Upper Gila watershed. We've done some water transactions in the Lower San Pedro watershed, and we've also got a focus on the Upper Santa Cruz watershed. So our first transaction was in 2012, and that was with a landowner along the Upper Gila. Since then, we've implemented 12 short-term voluntary water transactions with 6 landowners. So this really illustrates that those partners that we've worked with have enjoyed their experience working with us and have come back to do a second transaction because it benefits their land and it benefits their operations. Through those water transactions, 2,781 acre feet of water have been saved for the Upper Gila and Lower San Pedro river systems, in addition to benefiting those 6 landowners. And this acre feet translates to about 906 million gallons of water. So what exactly is a water transaction? So as I mentioned, these are all short-term, incentive-based voluntary agreements, water savings agreements. You might have heard of the term a water rights lease agreement. It's essentially the same sort of thing. And again, as I mentioned, so our approach is entirely outside of the state system. So in some other states across the West, it's incorporated as a part of the state system. You'd work with their equivalent of Arizona Department of Water Resources. Here, due in large part to the uncertainty related to water rights and the adjudication and the complexities related to that. So our approach is to work outside of that system. So I mentioned that all of our transactions are short-term, and that's intentional. So all of our transactions are structured to be anywhere from 1 year up to 4 years, and that's so that the landowner's water rights are not impacted. Because when you use it or lose it applies to a landowner potentially that hasn't used all or part of their water right at least once every 5 years. So our agreements are structured to be short-term so that there is no risk associated with that landowner. So environmental water transaction, like I mentioned, so we've got an agreement with a landowner and we've got an agreement with a funding partner. And it's essentially our job to help marry those two. So we've had some diverse funding partners from the Walton Family Foundation to the Bonneville Environmental Foundation to corporations such as Intel or Seninger Irrigation. Those have been some of our big corporate partners. And what's interesting about the corporate partners is oftentimes they are approaching water savings from a couple different perspectives. One can be they want to have a positive sustainability image. So they're investing in water conservation, particularly in the area Southwest, to show what their company is doing for sustainability. It looks good on annual reports and that sort of thing. Another motivation for them is that they are choosing to offset their water use. So Intel, for example, has a goal by 2030, I believe, to offset 100% of their water use by investing in water conservation across the West. It's a pretty ambitious goal, but it's through these types of agreements, often with nonprofits like us and with agricultural producers on the ground or municipalities or other water users, that they can generate those water savings to offset their use. So on the ground, what these water transactions look like, we've got a couple examples here. So the first one, seasonal fallowing. So as I mentioned, our first water transaction was a 1-year fallowing agreement. And this was on part of the grower's operation. It doesn't have to be on your full acreage. It can be on an irrigated pasture. We've done a fallowing agreement on a pasture that's almost 24 acres for a year. It can be part of a year. It can be seasonal. It can be up to 4 years. Another type of short-term agreement that we've done with some landowners has been a crop conversion project. So helping a landowner transition from a typical irrigated pasture to a lower water use pasture of native grasses. And lastly, another example we've got here is efficiency improvements. We've helped irrigators transition from a solid set sprinkler system that's been in place since the 60s, and that was leaking and surging throughout the lines, to a K-line sprinkler system. So you can see that that's the third picture down there. It's just a pod system that's easily pulled around and moved from field to field. So all of these types of agreements, we work with what landowners might be interested in for their property at a particular time. So like with our land transactions, agricultural landowners will come to us, will approach us if they're interested in an agreement like this, and we will work with funding partners to try to pitch the project and get some funding to make this happen on the ground. So a lot of times the motivation for these agricultural partners isn't necessarily that they want to conserve water for the river. They don't come up to us and say, I'd really like to promote flows in my Reach River this year. But we have had some landowners come up to us and say, I really would like to invest in some equipment that's going to help me manage my pasture and my farm better next year. If I follow this pasture this year, maybe I can get a little bit of funds to help me make that improvement next year. So it provides some seed money. In some cases, we've had landowners come up to us for the crop conversion projects who are particularly interested in promoting soil health. They want a deep root system that's going to retain precipitation better than the typical higher water use pastures. So that's a win-win for us. That's, okay, great, well, we're helping you accomplish your goals, your long-term goals with your pasture. We are accomplishing our goals of benefiting rural agriculture and benefiting these river systems, and we're helping our funders, corporations or foundations, conserve water so that water remains in the river system, in the San Pedro River system or the Gila River system. So that's really what our Desert Rivers program is all about, is finding those mutual benefits between rural agriculture and river systems and walking that line. So we're really flexible and open to hearing different ways on how to do that. So I pulled out some statistics here in our Lower San Pedro program. So this is 2014. We've actually worked with 2 landowners in the Lower San Pedro. And through those agreements, through 5 separate agreements, we've secured 320 million gallons of water for the river system and have supported close to 215,000 to those landowners. So it's a pretty win-win for the river system, the producers, and the rural economies to that support. And certainly crucial to these agreements are the landowners themselves, and the really conscientious, interested landowners that come to us because they're interested in conservation, or they're interested in finding some sort of common ground around conservation. Like I said, it's not always that basic motivation of wanting to support flows in the river next to their property, but it can be being open to finding those mutual benefits. So like I said, we are very flexible and interested to work with people and in finding those mutual benefits, and interested in exploring other ideas on how to do that. So certainly if you are someone who uses water and are interested to come to an agreement or explore some ideas on ways in which you might benefit from an incentive and also benefit your river system for a short period of time, feel free to reach out and we can talk through some ideas, and we can talk about what a pitch to a funder might look like and help make that transaction happen. So that's a pretty brief overview of our program and our tools, and I would be glad to take questions and talk through any ideas that folks have.
Any questions for Bailey? Thank you, Bailey.
Yeah.
Bailey, are you trying to do any type of brush management with to control the phreatophytes like I was talking about earlier?
We get that question a lot. The short answer is no, we haven't yet. The longer answer is that particularly our corporate partners that we work with and the foundation partners, they're interested in quantifiable water savings. With phreatophytes, limiting phreatophytes, and potentially increasing stream flow, the work quantifying those water savings gets a little murky and isn't quite as easy for them. So they are more interested in projects that are going to have that quantifiable water savings and in that cleaner pitch. But we certainly, I mean, we're pushing the bounds, I think. Like I said, I mean, a lot of these projects that are getting funded on systems with surface water diversions, where it's kind of a clear cut. Those water savings are pretty clear cut, how much water is being used, being not used. Living in desert river systems where you've got that high connectivity between surface water and groundwater, and the landowners that we've worked with are all shallow well users, that adds another layer to that calculation of water savings. So we understand that it gets a little bit trickier here in these desert river systems, and our funders, our partners understand that too. But I think pushing for a pitch around phreatophytes and water uses is maybe a little bit more than they might be willing to grant at this point.
Really, the only way you're going to get in my opinion, I've lived here my whole life and went to school for plant science and everything, and to get the river running again, yeah, at some point you're going to have to start looking at that. I mean, because that's the big difference. There's a lot less farmers along the river now than there was years ago when the river had a lot more water in it, and so that's pretty obvious. I mean, we're one of the last farms left along the river. And the idea has been, you know, if you stop farming, the river starts running again. Well, it hasn't worked. And and there's, I mean, it's just, you know, I'm not saying you have to get rid of all the mesquite, but if you look back in history, there was along the San Pedro River, it was all saccatone. There wasn't very many mesquites at all. And it's just, they encroached and it's took over the river. And like I said, it's obvious. We're actually doing a study right now, but you can measure you'll be able to measure you can measure the wells when the mesquites lose their leaves, and they come way up. I mean, the actual wells, it's simple.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I know that people don't like the idea of getting rid of trees or whatever, but that's really the elephant in the room. That's why the river's drying up more, because they've done away with pretty much all the agriculture. There's not a whole lot of agriculture left along the river.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can do that, and then at the end of the day, you know, really, now you've lost your agriculture and your food supply, and then now you have a mesquite thicket, because that's what will take over. Like I said, if you stop farming, the problem with natives is it'd be great to do native grasses, but the problem is that to maintain that, it takes a lot of, the mesquite are going to come in and take over those native grasses unless you're tilling or you have a way of chemically treating or tilling the mesquites. And it really makes me sick, the whole river, because I care about it more than anyone and rely on it more than anyone as fifth generation, and you know, the natural resources, and my goal is to pass it on to my kids. And it's just like some of these forests that, you know, weren't managed properly and they burned down, and now what do you have? And that's the same outlook to me. I'm going on and on, but I mean, I'm trying to stress, I mean, at least looking into the management of mesquites. It's pretty obvious. Like I said, we've managed these waters, and we rely on whether it's a diversion canal or a well water. If the wells are deeper, it costs us more money to pump. So, you know, and we've seen a direct correlation, you know, in the encroachment of the mesquites. And it's all up and down this river, and no one wants to do anything about it because it's bird habitat or whatever. And you can still have the bird habitat, but when it's going to become a monoculture along this whole river. And how many species does that help? When you have a biodiversity, I think it helps a lot more species. And when each farm you take out, it's just going to come in with mesquite, and it's going to be one monoculture of mesquite. And then later on, they're going to say, whoops, we screwed up.
Yeah.
And that's the fact. That's what I think. And it's, it hits a nerve with me on that whole situation. But, and it's not that I hate mesquite. It's the facts of the matter. I mean, you know, when my dad, they started clearing for charcoal years ago, and literally, and I was a kid, you know, when they cleared it into farmland and the river came up and started running, they got rid of those mesquites. And it's obvious. I mean, it's that obvious. Or you can measure well, go out and measure well along the river. And then while the mesquites this time of year, measure well while the mesquites have their leaves, and then go back after when it freezes and measure that same well and tell me what the water will increase a huge amount. But anyway, that's my soapbox. But I just think that you ought to be, you know, you ought to put, I mean, I don't know, focus on that. I mean, obviously you have funders, like you said, that they tell you what to focus on, but I don't think you're going to revive the river, because I'd like to see the river run too. But by stopping farming, it's not going to happen. I mean, you haven't stopped, but there's not much farming left on the Sandpaper River. That's the fact of the matter.
Yeah.
There's a lot more mesquite.
Yeah.
We understand that for sure. And, you know, supporting agriculture is central to our mission. So that's certainly not something that we're trying to do. And I get that even those short-term options aren't necessarily going to do it either. But I think that as our program continues to move forward, we've got to be thinking about other strategies that can help generate some of that water savings. And if it is something like mesquite removal in key areas, you know, I think that that's something that we can collaborate with other organizations who do hands-on restoration work to help make that happen. And if we can continue to pitch that and frame that in such a way that's attractive to funding partners, you know, I think we owe it to the producers that we're working with and the communities that we're working with to give that a shot. You know, I don't think that we're tied to a specific strategy. And like I said, I think as our program continues to grow, we need to see kind of what else is possible. So we're certainly interested to exploring other ideas as we move forward.
I mean, it's not, I'm not just talking about my land, but I would like to see the river run too, but it's frustrating because I understand what you're saying. A lot of the people that come in from the east or so forth, they think that, you know, we need trees, but if the trees weren't there before, what do you want? Do you want it the way it was when it used to run? The stream used to be a mandarin stream when my family came in here, and of Sackatoon, and part of it's due that they stopped fire too. So, but I mean, you have to look at that because there's really not that much agriculture left along the river. Anyway, that's enough of myself. I'm sorry, Sharma. I'm sorry going on and on.
It's a good point. We need to hear that. I appreciate you raising that.
Well, I mean, I care. Like I said, I probably care more about this river than anyone, believe it or not. But I've dedicated my whole life to
and I'll second Sharma. You know, really appreciate that, Andy, you weighing in. I mean, those perspectives from actual people working the land are what are going to help shape our program. So truly.
Well, thank you.
I want to just.
Oh, Sarah, you want to
mention? I mentioned it before, but the governor's long-term water augmentation committee is meeting this coming Friday, 10 to noon, and we are going to be discussing phreatophyte management as an augmentation strategy. ADWR staffer and I have done the homework for this presentation, and we've talked to a bunch of experts and reviewed the scientific literature. And so it may be of interest to Bailey to dial in. It's just the beginning of a long-term conversation about it, but certainly there are a lot of people who are in agreement from different perspectives that that there's room for at least some pilot projects, some more pilot projects on mesquite encroachment or woody plant encroachment as a way of improving flows. So
Thank you, Sarah.
I put that in there.
No, thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
And thank you. We're gonna wrap up because we're at 5 o'clock. We pushed it to the limit, but we do appreciate everybody chiming in. I wanted to say